Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And always with me, by my side, across the studio monitor, my good friend and fellow therapist, Mr. Ken Kelly. How you doing, Ken?
I am very well. How are you today, Rory?
You find me very well, and we've got a cracking episode today, haven't we?
We do indeed. Now, I apologise if I sound slightly different to normal. I have a bit of a sniffle. It's the change of the seasons here in the UK, and I generally pick up a sniffle at this time. So if I sound all deep and bassy, that's why. We're going to be kicking off episode 86 by speaking about touch in counselling. Really interesting topic. Many different opinions on this. Do you touch a client? Is it unethical to touch a client? Is it comforting to touch a client? So we're going to be digging into that and having a bit of a discussion. Then we're going to be going into a serious area with practice matters today, because Rory, you're going to be speaking about working with suicidal clients. Can you give us like a little flavour of that?
Yes, I mean, I think it's one of the things that student counsellors or new counsellors coming into practice for the first time get the most anxiety about. And I'm going to be talking about some practical things to think about when first starting your placement to help kind of ease your mind and give you a strategy should a client kind of say that they're feeling that they might want to take their own life.
Very, very important topic. Looking forward to that one. And we're going to be ending episode 86 today with looking at group work. So when you're working in groups, does that bring up anxiety for you? And we're going to be kicking that ball around as well. But let's kick off with touch in counselling. What's your thoughts on that, Rory?
Well, I've had many thoughts through the years on this. If we look at the literature, interestingly enough, when I first started 15 years ago, there was a lot of literature around touch in counselling. And then about 10 years ago, Means and Thom produced another edition of Person-Centred Counselling in Action. And I remember reading a part in that which said that they'd taken a lot of consideration and decided that given the way of the world, and that was 10 years ago, so, you know, a lot's happened since then, that they think possibly touch, certainly for male therapists, and I think there is a gender issue here, possibly isn't the best idea. My view is it's a very, very difficult one. There are times, and I'll own this, when I've worked with clients and I may have put my hand on their hand just to show some humanity when they're going through a really tough time, when they're really, really struggling, just to see they're not alone. But it is something that needs a lot of thought about. And also, I think that it's about consent. So if someone feels they need to do some touching, they need to ask themselves two fundamental questions, I think. The first is, who's the touch for? Is it for the client, or is it to allay some kind of fear or anxiety within themselves, the counsellor? And if it's the latter, then that's something that needs to be worked on in supervision. And also, I think about consent. So it's about saying to clients, is there anything you need from me? Or, a client may reach out, in which case sometimes it would be, I think, cruel not to kind of respond. But it's always about consent and checking, is this okay? Do you feel comfortable? When I work with clients, even moving my chair a little bit nearer, I always say, is this comfortable space for you? Just to be really clear and really transparent.
I like that you kind of identified that there is maybe a gender bias here, that if you are male, it may be a little tricky if working with a female client. And it is a lot to take in, and it's something I will own to struggling with. Because I'm not a touchy person in life. I'm not. In fact, it kind of brings up stuff for me when I have family gets-togethers and it's now the hugging circle. It just makes me feel terribly, terribly uncomfortable. But I have to realise that it's my stuff. And I remember going to supervision with this very topic some years ago, where a client, as you say, Rory, is there anything more that you need from me here, was my words to the client. And the client said, I could really do with a hug right now. And I had to really have a think about that, and it was appropriate. It was client-led within that moment, but I felt uncomfortable at the time, and uncomfortable enough to take that into supervision and really, really explore it. And I think a lot about touch is that appropriateness? Is it appropriate in that moment, in that setting? Is there consent? Is this something that the client wants and not something that you, and you've covered this, Rory, you, the therapist, feel there is a need for, because that's coming from your frame of reference, not theirs. And it's tricky. It just feels like tricky ground. Even now, to me, it does feel like tricky ground. It
does. And in fact, Means and Thorns did right and say from a male perspective, it was probably better, probably not to touch, because it could be misconstrued. Interestingly, I have the latest copy of person-centered counselling action, and I can't find that anywhere. It was in a middle edition. It goes without saying that if you're working with young people, working with children, touch is an absolute no-no, because it can be misinterpreted. Children may not be as sophisticated to understand what's being offered, and also within schools and young people's environments, there usually is policies of no touch. So, and one final plea, if you're working with a client and you do give them a hug, put it in your notes. I know it might seem a bit spooky or a bit odd, but put it in your notes. So if a complaint is ever raised, you can say, well, look, I put it in my notes. I have nothing to hide here. I put it in my notes. It is very, very difficult, because we know there's some really strong evidence out there that humans benefit from touch. We are a tactile species. It's just sometimes we're constrained by the society we live in, which I think is sad.
I agree. It is sad, and it's always thinking now about where could this go? How could this go wrong? And a complaint regarding touch would be really tricky, difficult, and I'm shuddering. It's an uncomfortable topic. I'm going to be honest. It's uncomfortable for me to even talk about this on the podcast, Rory. It's bringing stuff up for me, and I recognize that's my stuff. And I think that's the thing here. You need to look at yourself and work on that. And I guess one other angle on that is, if a client is asking you to touch, and it is appropriate in that moment, and there is maybe a holding of a hand or maybe a short hug, if that starts repeating itself as a pattern, is the client requiring something more from you than the talking therapy that you were there for? Because it is called a talking therapy for the reason that it is talked out. It's just slippery ice under my feet right now, Rory.
Yeah, if you could see the studio monitor here, you'd see Ken
squirming.
Squirming. Yeah, it is very difficult. And clients who've had historic abuse, clients who may disassociate, you've got to be very, very thoughtful about that, because sometimes it's very difficult to separate the past from the present for some people. So it takes a lot of thought. My view is nowadays, if I'm honest, I don't touch. But if a client instigates a hug, I'll respond. I won't stand back. I won't be a defensive therapist. I think that's the danger. You think being defensive and frightened of showing your humanity is incredibly dangerous for a therapist, because you become cold and, almost Freudian, standing back. The relationship is about a lot of aspects. So it takes a lot of thought. But as I say, one plea, if you think you want to hug the client, you may want to ask yourself, who is this hug for? Is it for the client or is it for me?
Agreed. And like you said, Rory, get it in your notes. Very, very important. Great topic. I think this is topic worthy of debate further. I'd love to know what your opinions on this are. And you can share your opinions by going to our Facebook group. Just go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. Over 19,000 fellow like-minded people who are studying counselling or interested in counselling, or maybe qualified counsellors, including counselling tutors, and we can get this debate going. Go and share your thoughts and feelings on that. But moving away from touching counselling into practice matters, a serious, and I think before we met, Rory, you said the real cliff face of what we do in counselling, working with suicidal clients. Can you kind of give us a flavour of what we can expect?
Yes, I'm going to be talking about setting the ground and being very, very clear on, what to do should a client disclose to you that they're thinking of taking their own lives. That's the headline, basically.
Important, and we're going to pick up with Practice Matters after this short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
So before I start this part of the podcast, I just want to make it clear that this isn't a training course as such. This is observations from my own practice and also teaching students for a number of years, to be able to have some strategies in place should a client disclose they're suicidal. If you want a training course, you should enrol on one, and they're usually for around 1 or 2 days. So one of the anxieties that comes up time and time again for student counsellors is if a client discloses they're feeling suicidal. As with most things in counselling and indeed life in general, hoping for the best and planning for the worst is always a good policy. So here are some key things every student counsellor in a placement should know. So the first is find out what your organisation's policy is for disclosure, and if a client discloses they are feeling suicidal, what do you do? So you really need to know what the policy is and what you're expected to do in that situation. The second thing is be clear on the threshold of disclosure. So is it you have to disclose if a client mentions they're feeling suicidal, or if they tell you you have a plan? So you really need to know what triggers the threshold. Certainly in agencies I've worked in as a student, the threshold was quite low. And what happened was if clients even mentioned they're feeling suicidal, sometimes you would have to disclose. And the reason for that is because there was an acknowledgement that student counsellors may not have the experience of assessing that a more experienced member of staff might have. And it was better to do a kind of in-house referral just to check out where the client was and manage the risk. You also need to find out the person in the organisation you disclose to and what the procedure is. And crucially, what goes on after you've disclosed. You need to know the whole mechanism so that you're fully aware of the mechanisms that go on when you've disclosed and another member of staff's involved. In my former organisation, when I was a student, if there was a real clear and present danger, they would order a taxi and they would take the client down to accident and emergency and liaise with the psychiatric professionals there. And they would have someone meet them there, someone from the psychiatric team meet them there, usually a psychiatric nurse, if it was real, clear and present danger. So you need to know what the mechanism is. Remember that if a client discloses suicidal feelings or has a plan, it creates an opportunity for you both to explore what the client wants and needs. So this really is about not running out and running down a corridor in a panic, but really using the relationship to explore what the client wants. It may be that they explore a little bit of what's going on for them. It's an opportunity for you as a therapist to really understand the client and crucially make sure the client is understood, the client feels understood by you. If a client discloses they're feeling suicidal, as I said, don't panic, explore what's going on and make sure they feel heard and try to explore what options they have for living. Sometimes talking about children, spouse or something they like doing can be a real anchor into the living. I've known a lot of people who've had suicidal feelings but won't act on it because they don't want to upset their children or their partner or miss out doing something they like. So those are usually really good opportunities. The other thing, and this was a kind of observation given to me by Dr. Ewan Gallivan, who's a researcher in the Republic of Ireland and an eminent researcher. I interviewed him, and that interview is in the CSR. We talked about working with clients who may be considering taking their own life, and he said sometimes gently reminding the clients if they're not there, therapy cannot continue. Therapy equals hope. When people come to therapy, they're hoping that something can change. And if they're not there, they cannot engage in it. So sometimes just reminding the client, if they're going through a difficult decision-making process, that they cannot engage in therapy if they're not there. In other words, what hope is there for change if they're not there to explore it? Make sure you have details of support groups or crisis lines to hand. It's no good saying to the client you'll send them on. Be prepared. So, like with anything in counselling, hoping for the best and planning for the worst is absolutely essential. So make sure you've got phone numbers of the Samaritans, or if it's a young person, Papyrus, or any organisation that they can use if they're in crisis. You can't be with them all the time. So it may be just giving those numbers out. It may be that if in the middle of the night they're really struggling, they can phone someone up like the Samaritans and get a sense of where they're at, and someone can talk to them. You know, being isolated is a big trigger for feeling suicidal and acting on it. So if someone's talking to someone, they're communicating, there's always hope. And hope is something that really is a strong word or a feeling when someone is being suicidal, the hope that they'll be able to see a different path and stay in the living. And finally, make sure you get the support you need. Supervision, if the incident has triggered a personal experience, and access your own therapy. So sometimes working with clients who are talking about ending their lives can be quite stressful for therapists. Can be very stressful for therapists. And indeed, new therapists, it can be very, very difficult. So, you can't be there for someone all the time. You can't stand over and watch them. So it might be that you get feelings of anxiety. Take that to supervision. But also, if it's overwhelming and maybe you've had suicide in your family history or someone you knew and it triggers you, then access personal therapy or your own support network. Really, really important, that. So with those ideas discussed, I'm going to kind of go on to some suicide myths and facts. And I'm grateful to the Samaritans, an organisation founded a number of years ago by Chad Varra, who developed a system and a help and support for people who are maybe feeling suicidal. And I've put the links, those essential links and contact details in the handout, so make sure you download it. So the myths are, once a person has made a serious suicide attempt, the person is unlikely to make another. The actual fact is that people who have tried to end their lives before have a significant risk of dying by suicide than the rest of the population. It's almost like they've crossed a line and it becomes easier to cross the second time. So if someone's had or attempted suicide before, then you have to think about the risk more seriously. The next myth is, if a person is serious about killing themselves, there's nothing you can do. Well, actually, that's a myth, because the fact is that if you're feeling, or someone is feeling actively suicidal, it could be temporary, or someone may be feeling low or struggling to get support for a long time. And that is why getting the right kind of support at the right time is so important. So there is something you can do about it, and you can help the client. And that usually is about being there, listening to them, offering that support, but also offering any other form of support that could be useful. The other myth that comes up a lot is talking about suicide is a bad idea, as it may give someone the idea to try it. Suicide is a very, very taboo topic in society. And a lot of the time, people who are suicidal don't want to burden others and don't want to discuss it. But if you act directly about suicide, you actually give permission for the client to tell you how they feel. And sometimes it's just a huge relief for someone just to talk about it and what they're experiencing. And once people are talking and you've got people engaged and the client's engaged, there's a better chance of looking at other options. So talking about it will absolutely not give someone the idea to try it. Another myth is most suicides happen in the winter months. And in fact, suicides are more common in the spring and summer. And I asked Dr. Ewan Gallivan why that is, and he said he didn't know, but he was surmising, and the people who did the research with him, that possibly it was because with the summer weather, people feel more active and may be more liable to act on what's going on for them. Another myth, and this is a particularly cruel one, and I hear it a lot. People who threaten suicide are just attention seeking and shouldn't be taken seriously. People who threaten suicide, and I think threaten is a bit of a tough word, should always be taken seriously. It may be they want attention, and it's a way of calling out for help. And if you give them the help, it may very well save their life. And finally, people who are suicidal want to die. The fact is that the majority of people who feel suicidal do not actually want to die. They want to live the life they have. It's a small distinction, but a fact that's very important, and it's why talking through other options at the right time is so vital. In my experience as a practitioner, when this has come up in my practice, just talking through options and talking about it and engaging with it in a way that's open, non-judgmental, and certainly non-fearful from the side of the therapist is just so beneficial. You never know, just by talking about it and allowing someone to speak, you might very well save a life. So I'll put some links in the handout. Make sure you download it and make sure you have those links to hand. You may never know when you may need them.
Thank you as always, Rory. So important. And I've had in my practice career a number of clients at least mentioning that they have thought about it. It is something that will come up. So maybe a podcast episode worth noting, writing down and revisiting from time to time. Really important topic. And of course, you can get Rory's super duper handout on preparing to work with suicidal clients or clients that may disclose suicidal thoughts. And to get that, it's really simple. You just go to our website. That is counsellingtutor.com. That's where it all happens. At the very top, you'll see that we have a tab on our menu bar that says podcasts. Click on podcasts, go to episode 86. There you'll find all of the show notes, as we call them. That's all the notes from today's episode with all the links that we may mention. And you can download Rory's super handout from that very page. And of course, if you are already a member of our paid for resources, which is the Counselling Study Resource or the Handouts Vault, that has already been added to your resources for you. So no need to go to the page. You can just log in and download it straight away. And if you're wondering what is this Counselling Study Resource, well, we spoke about it before Practice Matters, and we'll put another link into that for you at the end of today's program. But moving on to something that comes up again and again in our group. And I'm using the word group because we're about to speak about groups, and I'm talking about our Facebook group. So often we hear about the anxiety that comes up for some learners when working in groups. What's your thoughts on that, Rory?
Yeah, I mean, I taught for just over a decade, and one of the things that creates a lot of anxiety, I think, for students meeting new people is what they're going to disclose about themselves. And certainly in the skills, it can become quite difficult. So I think if there's any tutors out there, and I'm sure they're all doing this, a good group contract is really, really important right at the beginning as the group starts to form, so that everybody knows exactly the limits of confidentiality, that they share what is appropriate for them, that they're not forced to share, and that's okay. They can talk about what they want. So I think that's a big takeaway. If anybody's listening and thinking, I feel a bit anxious about talking about myself, well, just share what you feel comfortable with. And, as trust builds, it might be you share a little bit more. And I also think that in skills work, in practice, it's quite difficult when people bring made-up stories. And I know I've seen this from time to time, and I know you have, Ken. People bring made-up stories, and you can only go so far with that unless you're a professional actor and you've created a whole backstory to the character you've invented. It's really, I think, unfair for the person who's doing the listening, because they can only get so much. They can't really understand what's going on, and unless you've happen to have a student who's a professional actor and has got a whole character they've developed. So sharing your own story is really important, but it does create anxiety. I know people have taken me to one side when I was teaching and said, I'm really worried about doing skills, and I'm very worried about talking to people and what will people think. And it's all part of the growth process, Ken.
It is, and I can recognize it also from standing beside you and tutoring counselling. And there are different forms that group may take. So the one that you've mentioned there, Rory, is skills practice, where you may be working in pairs, triads, or maybe something called counselling in a fishbowl, where you'll have a small group of people watching you as you practice your skills or bring your material. As you've quite rightly said, Rory, it's about being safe, keep safe, your own safety first. And you don't have to bring heavy material. You can bring how your day was. You can bring a bad day you had. You can bring a good day you have, because certainly clients bring that kind of material from time to time into our counselling rooms. It doesn't have to be some deep, dark tragedy that you have to dredge up there. Within a group contract, and as the relationships, I guess, mature through your studies, you may find yourself choosing to bring more into those situations. But there's different flavors of groups. Another group is a personal development group where you may sit. And how do you feel within a personal development group? Do you feel that you can bring information? Do you feel anxiety within that group? When your class and your peers are split up into small groups to do group discussion, and maybe you have to present that back to your other peers, how do you feel within that situation? How are you within a group? And counseling is about personal development as much as it is about learning the skills and the theory. And feeling maybe anxiety within a group is a great opportunity to look into self and ask what that's about. And hey, who knows? Maybe you get to the point where you dare to even mention that in a personal development group and say, you know what, I'll be honest with you, I feel anxiety in some of our group situations, and see where that goes. It's interesting.
It is. And I also, if there's another plea, I've been doing a lot of pleas in this podcast, but if there's another plea, try to work with different people. It's noticeable that as a tutor through the years, people tend to get into little kind of diasporas, little groups, or diaspora, I think is the correct pronunciation. And it's good to rotate. A good tutor will say, work with someone else. Don't work with that person. You work with those people, 3 times this month. Work with somebody else. And I think, part of becoming a counsellor is certainly listening to other people's voices, but it's also about finding your own voice, Ken.
Oh, I like that. I like that so much. When you're speaking about this, it's pretty relevant at this time. It's near the beginning of the UK academic year. Many new groups are coming together. And one of the things that is interesting to me is where we choose to sit within a group. So when you walk into your lecture theatre or into your class or wherever you're getting your training from, do you sit in the same chair next to the same people each time? Or do you choose to kind of move it around a bit and push your own comfort zone, I guess? Because that's an interesting one. Shuffle it around. Like you're saying, Rory, don't work with the same people all the time. But yeah, again, this is an interesting episode for me because groups was something else I struggled with a little bit in the very beginning. And I recall, and maybe that's why I kind of mentioned it earlier, I recall when I found the inner courage to share it with the group in PD, and it was very, very interesting feedback. I left with a different perspective on it.
Absolutely. And some devilish tutors, like no names mentioned, sometimes after a few weeks get the group to stand up and move around and sit next to different people. How awful of that particular tutor. But a good tutor will do a group contract. That's really essential at the beginning, so everybody knows where they are. Maybe an icebreaker if you're going into a new group. If you're starting your studies new, it might be an icebreaker. And try and work with everybody. The key here is everybody's got something to offer.
I agree. There's much power in a group, isn't there, Rory? It's a very powerful dynamic within a group. And we, again, saw this in tutoring where new academic year, you may have learners coming from different places. You may have people that are progressing within the same learning institution. Well, I'll just use a college, for example, from within the same college, joined by people from a different college that maybe did their level 3 at a different college, and they're coming together. And words that I would hear are our group. And it's interesting that the our group thing can last for months and months and months. The old group, I feel most comfortable with the people that I did my last year's training on. And the reality is, when you walk away from that initial group that you were part of, so the end of your studies, that's it. The group disbands, it dissolves, it goes away, and it becomes a brand new group. You are all new in a new group.
Absolutely. And that newness can really kind of show itself because as people change, certainly I think in level 4, when people go into the practice years, that is where real personal development kick in. And I know from my own experience, and I know that probably some of my ex-peers may listen to this, is that, I was very close to some people initially when I started. And at the end, quite frankly, they were just people I used to pass in the corridor. And I guess that's the nature of growth. We would work together, but I became closer to other people as I progressed through that 2-year diploma, and they did as well, and that's a very natural thing. It just goes to show there's many people in your life that can have a really good influence. So don't limit yourself is what I'd say to just a small group of people. Try and network and try and meet other people as well. It's useful.
Indeed. That is episode 86, Counselling Tutor Podcast. We opened today speaking about touch in counselling. Rory went into practice matters and covered working with suicidal clients. Just want to mention on suicidal clients, if you are a member of our counselling study resource, if you log into your counselling study resource dashboard, click on the continuing professional development section. There is a fantastic interview that Rory did with Dr. Ewan Gallivan on working with suicidal clients. Really worth a listen. If you're not a member of the Counselling Study Resource, the information to join will come up in just a moment. And then, of course, we closed off today with working in groups and looking at the anxiety and your part in that group. Great episode.
Absolutely. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.